So good morning. Today's program is brought to you by the Institute for Learning and Retirement. It is one of our wonders, and today's topic is Florida's fabulous frogs. I happen to have personal acquaintance with Dr. Steve Johnson, and I will read you a very short, you know how these professors are, right? It goes on for pages and pages, but yeah, no, yes, this is why you're going to have a good time today. So Dr. Steve Johnson is an associate professor of wildlife ecology, of course, at the University of Florida. He teaches and mentors students in natural resource conservation and leads extension programs on Florida's diverse wildlife. He has more than 2 decades of research on amphibians and reptiles, from Florida's native frogs and turtles to the global challenges of invasive species. He has helped shape how science informs both management and public understanding. He has authored or co-authored over 40 peer-reviewed papers, trained more than 30 graduate students, and secured $1.4 million in research support. So when I tell you about what I'm doing with Gulf Scholars, watch out. Through his UF Wildlife website and extension publications, Dr. Johnson translates science into practical tools for communities and agencies working to protect ecosystems in a rapidly changing world. So those of you who are not familiar with me, I am a new Oak Hammock resident. I've been a facilitator for ILR courses for the past 6 years. My name is Ellen Siegel, and I do work for the CLEO Institute, and CLEO stands for Climate Leadership Engagement Opportunities. And today's program is not necessarily about climate, it's about frogs. I want to tell you a quick story about why you're going to love Dr. Steve Johnson. So I took advantage of the fact that if you're over 60 and live in Florida for over a year, you can take classes at the University of Florida. And the first class I ever took was Wildlife Ecology, Florida's Wildlife, with Dr. Johnson. And in the first class, 150 students, you know how the amphitheaters are. He opens the class by saying, who's had an encounter with wildlife? And a few people raised their hands and told some stories. And then the rest of the class got to vote on which was the best story. So the young woman who was swimming with sharks she won. And Dr. Johnson pulls out of a box something, and he throws it at the winner, who grabs it, and it is a rat. Dr. Steve Johnson.
Thanks, Ellen. Don't tell anybody I throw rats at people. It's probably a gentle toss, but that was a prize for the best story. So, professor at University of Florida, and since been at UF a little over, I'm in my 21st year, I think, and starting August 15th, I moved from my position as a teacher and as extension specialist, and this is what I do as part of my outreach or extension, into our interim chair position. Our current chair was planning to step down, and I agreed to serve for a couple months while the new chair that we had hired was coming on board. And I was in Rocky Mountain National Park and got a call from my dean saying, hey, the guy who was going to be the chair is not coming now. He's declined the job after goings on at UF that I won't even talk about. And so we're going to need you to go longer than just a couple months. And I was like, okay, so I'm doing it still to the end of December, then we'll see how it goes after that. But the upshot is I don't get to do this kind of fun stuff that often. All right. Hi, Zoom people. Sorry. So, so now I'm the chair and I don't get to do as much fun stuff. It's evaluations and it's all kinds of things. But I love talking about frogs, as Ellen might have alluded to. And this is sort of a bit of a modification of a lecture that I do with my students in my class called Wildlife of Florida, which is my favorite class. And if I'm in the chair position, I don't get to teach it in the spring, unfortunately. Someone else will do a great job, but I will miss doing that. So here's what we're going to talk about today. So you guys tell me if you want the captioning or you'd rather see, that just says presentation outline. So I'm going to tell you what amphibians are, their features, the diversity. There's 3 groups of amphibians that some of you may know. Some of you probably are familiar with frogs and salamanders, but there's a third one. And then we're going to go through a number of species accounts, individual species of these families, and I'll tell you a little bit about their biology. Most of these are, maybe not all of them, but a lot of them you could probably find on the property here. This is not a comprehensive, covering of all Florida's frogs. We don't have time to do that in one presentation. But some of the ones that are more common that you actually might see around here. We had rain last night, first time in a while. Does anybody hear any frogs calling last night by any chance? I did not hear any myself. We're in the transition between spring, so most people think frogs are the sound of summer. Well, we're getting now, the summer calling frogs are winding down or ending, and we're getting ready for our winter breeding frogs to start. So we have a whole suite of frogs that breed in the wintertime, and one of those is the southern spring peeper, that if you have a little swampy area around here, you'll no doubt you'll start to hear them. If there's water there, it's been pretty dry this year, but if you have standing water in a forested wetland or a swamp, these spring peepers will start to call pretty soon. Usually they're from around Thanksgiving or even a little bit earlier than that, usually just November through the end of March or into April. So you might be hearing them, and hopefully the calls will play and you'll hear what they sound like. So, all right. So what are amphibians? That just says class amphibia. So amphibians are one of the major, vertebrate groups that we have. So they have a backbone. Reptiles, birds, mammals, and fishes are the other ones. And these are the things that make an amphibian an amphibian. Now, not exclusively. So ectothermic, or some people would say cold-blooded, like they say, oh, the snakes are cold-blooded. Well, a snake laying in the sun has warm blood. It just means they don't create their own body temperature, they don't regulate their body temperature with their physiology. They regulate it with the environment. And if they need to be warmer, they will go into a warmer area. If they need to get cooler, they'll get out of the sun and go to a cooler area. So they're ectothermic, not endothermic. We're endothermic, which also means they don't have to eat as frequently as mammals do, because we have to power our metabolism. A big crocodile in Africa could eat one wildebeest and probably survive the entire year, because it doesn't have to power its metabolism on a daily basis. And amphibians are the same way. Usually they're active at night, or we most associate frogs with being active at night, but many of them are active in the day as well. Same thing for the salamanders. And as adults, they're carnivorous, so you don't get any vegetarian eating amphibians. When they're tadpoles, the ones that do have tadpoles, from a frog standpoint, they will rasp algae and little microorganisms, so they would be feeding on plant material. But as adults, by and large, they're carnivorous. Frogs and salamanders certainly have a projectile tongue that it's sort of thick and viscous until they stick it out, and then it sort of gets runny and it wraps around their prey and they pull it back into their mouth. How the Sicilians feed, which is the third group of amphibians, I don't even think anybody knows, but I don't think they have a protrusible tongue. And in general, they're small. Some of them get really big. I think we have really big mammals. There's some really big reptiles. Some birds are pretty large. Amphibians, by and large, are pretty small. Here's an example of one of the world's smallest frogs, this Microhyla nepticola from Borneo. There's the frog sitting on a penny. That is a puny little frog. And then here's a Chinese giant salamander. So that's it. Those are at the extremes, but most of them are pretty little. And this is really important. They have soft, moist, glandular skin. They do not have scales. They do not have feathers. They don't have fur. All right. So those are the unique features of amphibians. And because they have moist, glandular skin, you're usually going to find them in damp habitats. There are some species that will occur in deserts. They'll need to be active at night when the RH, or the relative humidity, is the highest, and active when it rains. So when frogs around here, you'll see them hopping around on moist, rainy nights, usually not so much when conditions are dry. And then as a group, they're distributed all around the world, but there are none currently on Antarctica. The sad thing that you probably have known, about for a while is that amphibians are experiencing global declines and extinctions from these two fungi. This is BD, is a disease that's been affecting frogs for a while, and then now this is another chytrid, a fungus that's affecting salamanders. So experiencing global declines. They're in dire straits, and so that's one reason to be concerned about them. All right, in terms of diversity, globally, You can see right there, we're approaching 8,000, almost 9,000 species total, dominated by frogs. So from a global standpoint, almost 8,000 species of frogs, far fewer salamanders. So, 800 to probably 900. These numbers go up every year. I give a presentation as we learn more about, describe new species that were unknown to science, or when we take a really broadly distributed species and take a closer look at it from a molecular genetic standpoint and realize, hey, there's really 3 cryptic species here, and we didn't realize that until we started taking a close look at their genetics. And then we have this group, these Sicilians. These are these large, or can get large, but sort of eel-like aquatic salamanders that they look like an eel, but eels are fish. Poorly known. We don't know much about Sicilians globally, and there's not many species. However, Florida now has the dubious distinction of being the only place in the world where there is an introduced species of Sicilian. There's one that's established in some canals down around Miami, and it's spreading, and probably is in the Everglades. No one knows what impacts they might have. And then Florida, again, 1 introduced species, around 30 salamanders, and around 30 species of frogs. And that's what I'm talking about today. And 4 of those are introduced, and I'll talk about 3 of them. So that's kind of the backdrop, all right? So now we're going to go family by family approach. So the first family is family Bufonidae. These are toads. We have 4 native species in Florida. I'm only going to talk about 1 of them. So toads, by and large, certainly in the United States and in Florida, but really throughout the world where toads occur, have dry, rough, sort of warty skin. They're chunky, stout-bodied, plump, little robust frogs. They have these glands on their shoulders called parotoid, not parotid. It's called parotoid glands, and they produce a bit of a toxin. And the native southern toad I'm going to show you, it has these glands, and if you squeeze them a little bit, it'll produce this little white substance. Scientific curiosity, all right? I was messing around with a bunch of southern toads one time. I'm like, this is an anti-predator thing. What does it taste like? So I lick my finger, very bitter to my taste, but not a problem for people's pets. The cane toad, on the other hand, Bufomarinus, or the giant toad, marine toad, it has these big glands, produces a very thick, viscous toxin, and that will kill a dog or a cat that swallows one for sure or bites one, but not the native one. But they have these glands on their shoulders. Very reduced toe webbing. They're not aquatic, they need to swim, so they have a little bit of webbing between their toes, but not much. And then toads do not have teeth. No anurans, so that's the group that just means frogs. No anurans have teeth in their lower jaw, and toads lack teeth for whatever reason in their upper jaw. So they basically are toothless. So toads don't have any teeth. That's, next time you're out doing trivia, maybe that question will come up. I doubt it, but there's some knowledge that probably won't get you very far, but there you go. And then I remember they used to say, if a toad pees on you, it's going to give you warts. I have 0 warts on my hands. I have been peed on by many a toad. They're not peeing. What they're doing is when they're handled by a person, that's a perceived predator. They will just void their bladder as a way to try to startle the would-be predator. And like if it's a bird or a snake, and they might drop the toad. For you, it's just like, oh, it peed on me. And no, they don't give you words. 1 introduced species of toad, and this is why I want to point out, it's redundant to say frogs and toads. A toad is just a specific type of frog. So all toads are frogs, but not all frogs are toads. Okay, so if there's one thing you take away from this, that's what it should be. Okay, all right. So southern toad. So pictures covering them up, but I think you can get the gist of it. There's one up there. This is that little circle is pointing to the parotoid, or that round gland that's shaped like a bean on the frog's back. Here's an image was sent by an extension colleague in the Tampa area. Somebody had collected a whole bunch of these things, thinking they were invasive cane toads. And he was asking me, are these cane toads? Because we don't want to euthanize them if they're not. And I'm like, none of them are cane toads. So it just shows you how much individual variation. But by and large, they're brown or gray. They can be red. They're warty, so you can see the warts on the skin. And then they have the way to tell this one from that marine toad, the cane toad, which we do not have here in Gainesville, but I'll talk about a little bit at the end. These southern toads have these crests right on the top of the head. A little tough to see in the image, but they're right there. And if you look down here, they look like little horns on the top of the head. That's one way to tell. And also those parotoid glands are relatively small and shaped like a bean. But that's, how you identify them. So if you see the, little hoppy toad outside on a warm night under a street light, waiting for insects to crash under the sidewalk and then scoop them up with their tongue, that's probably going to be this southern toad, very terrestrial. Toads are terrestrial. And they are largely generalists. So they're going to be in all types of habitats, and they're going to breed in all types of wetlands, from little small bodies of water, roadside ditches. They would breed at the margin of a lake, a little shallower at the edge of a lake or a river. So they're very much a common frog in suburban areas and in natural areas, all right? And prominent parotoid glands. Distasteful to pets, as I mentioned, but they're not harmful, all right, to your pet. They're tadpoles, school, so you might see a school of these little black tadpoles, hundreds or thousands of them swimming around together. And their call, I used to be able to whistle, and I realized driving here today, oh, hang on. If you can whistle and hum at the same time, you can mimic a southern toad call. I couldn't do it earlier. There sort of it is. Now we're going to see. I hope my calls work. I have calls for all of these. So if we can just try there and then click, hopefully that'll work. There's what they sound like. So it's just a trill. To me, that's the sound, one of the sounds of summer. And you just go for a long time and you'll stop and they'll pick up the whistling trill. I can't do it. I used to be able to do that call really, really well. And like all the other frogs, primarily they're making these calls, the males are making them to attract females. Frogs will make calls for other reasons, like to announce an alarm call, like if it gets attacked by a predator, or just to announce their presence. But by and large, they're calling to attract mates. So good, the audio is going to work. I'm very happy about that. I spent a lot of time re-upping all these things yesterday. So, all right, so that's the one toad that we have. This family is family Hylidae. These are tree frogs, chorus frogs, and cricket frogs. Most of the ones that you know of that you might recognize are in this tree frog group. Chorus frogs are in this group, and these are very arboreal, the tree frogs, genus Hyla. The chorus frogs are, you're probably not near as familiar with them. They're in the same family, but most of those are winter breeders, where most of these breed in the summer. And then we have two species of what are called cricket frogs that are in the same family, but they don't look like the other ones. So they're quite variable. And then the ones in the genus Hyla have these toe pads, and that allows them to climb. So if you see a frog on the outside of a window, stuck to a window, it's going to be a tree frog. Depending on where you are in the state, it might more likely be a Cuban tree frog than a native frog. Here in Gainesville, we still have a good mix of native frogs, and there are Cuban tree frogs, so I'll talk about them at the end. And they're all very terrestrial except Acris. That is the scientific genus of the cricket frog, and they're aquatic. You'll see them on land, but they're all around the water usually, and I've got a slide on them. And then some are very common in suburban areas, like squirrel tree frogs and green tree frogs. Unfortunately, where Cuban tree frogs have invaded and become abundant, you see a decline and a loss of squirrel tree frogs specifically because they're much smaller and the Cuban tree frogs just eat them, and the green tree frogs will decline as well. And then we have the one introduced or invasive one is that Cuban tree frog. And if you go online and you Google Cuban tree frog, Florida, you're going to find my name. I've been talking about this thing for 20 some odd years. And so if you know that Cuban tree frogs have negative impacts and it's suggested that humanely euthanize them, that's my outreach work. All right, so let's go through some of the tree frogs now. All right, the first one, definitely a very unique summer sound. Growing up, fishing around, I grew up in Orlando, and we had a neighborhood that had access to the lake. And I would go down there and I would fish, and I would hear green tree frogs calling because they breed in lots of different habitats, but they're one that can really breed in lakes, large bodies of water. Some of the frogs I'm going to show you today, they do not breed in large bodies of water because large bodies of water usually are permanent and they have fish, which are predators. This one, whatever reason, the tadpoles can deal with the predators. Some other ones, they can only breed in small, ephemeral, isolated wetlands that lack fish predators. This one, though, it's a very common, ubiquitous animal, usually green in color. They can be gray, as you can see there, sometimes darker green. They often have these little yellow spots. But the way to tell them for sure, without a doubt, is they have a clean line going from the lip down the side of the body. And you can see sometimes it's outlined in black. That's a very clean, well-demarcated line, which differentiates them from this one I'll show you next called the squirrel tree frog. And so my students often struggle differentiating greens and squirrel tree frogs till they see a couple of them. And then like, oh, this is not so difficult. No, it's pretty easy if you get familiar with them. So pretty easy, relatively easy to identify. They're a long, narrow frog. Usually they're green. Sometimes you can see like this one from out at the Ordway Swisher Preserve out near Melrose. Beautiful, bright green frog. Again, lots of different habitats, lots of different wetlands in which they'll breed, retention ponds, roadside ditches, things like that. Very rarely you'll find a green tree frog missing that line, but almost always it's there. Their call is this is a summer breeder, all right? So they're stopping their calls now. They'll breed among cattails, like in a retention pond around here. Their call is sort of a sort of sounds like that. So see if I'm even close. We'll play their call. If you live in Florida very long, you recognize that. They will go on. They will call from one night to the next, to the next, to the next. Some of these frogs are only going to call when it's been really raining hard out. And I'll show you one called the spadefoot toad in a minute. So pretty common frog, beautiful, beautiful animal. The next one is the squirrel tree frog. Oh, there we go. So this is the one that looks like that one. And you can see from this picture right here, highly variable. All right. That's all the same species of frog in that photo. This is one where I worked for the U.S. Geological Survey as an amphibian biologist and having lunch with my colleagues. And I looked up and I'm like, that picture is going to come in handy sometime. I'm going to get my camera. I have used that image countless times. People have asked me to use it. It's been used in books on frogs. Just it shows you how much individual variation, which can make it sometimes difficult to identify a species if you have so much individual variation. It's just like look around this room. None of us look the same, right? Same with these frogs, and you can really appreciate it there. And they can change color. The green ones can turn dark. They can express spots. It's variable. This is a typical color. You can see it looks a lot like that frog, that green tree frog I just showed you. But that line, you see the little line? It is not well demarcated. It's jagged. And the green tree frog, there was green above and below the line here. That little sort of transition is between the darker green, usually green, sometimes brown coloration on the back, and the lighter color on the belly. It occurs right there. And they don't get as big. Green tree frogs, 2.5 inches long. These guys are small. Only about an inch or a little bit larger is the biggest that they get. They also occur in a lot of different habitats. You see flatwoods, that's a type of pine-dominated area with a bunch of saw palmetto in it. Hammocks, so big forested areas like you have out here. Suburban settings, in the absence of Cuban tree frogs, but with Cuban tree frogs, they decline. They'll breed in retention pond, ditches, isolated wetlands, and sometimes in lakes too. So really, just a cute little frog. And their call sounds like a raspy quack. They get their name because apparently it reminded someone of the chattering of a squirrel. I don't think it sounds anything like no gray squirrel, at least, maybe some other species of squirrel, but their call is a raspy sort of quack. We'll try this one now. Another classic summer sound. And a little frog can make very energetically expensive, but they can make a lot of noise. So, all right, that's good. We can go to the next one. So the next one is the pine woods tree frog. You probably have them around here. They like more open areas than this hammocky, real dense habitat. They kind of look like the squirrel tree frog. They can be green, but by and large, they're brown or gray. Although I've seen a green one time, and until I stretched out its back leg, it was not this individual, until I pulled out the back leg and looked at its butt. You spend a lot of time looking at frog butts if you're an amphibian biologist, but you'll see it's got these really distinct either orange, yellow, or white spots on the thigh, and the bone in the thigh right there is the femur, hence the name Hyla femoralis. And they also have a dark mask. You can sort of see it there on the side of the head, a little dark mask. These ones now, they also superficially look like Cuban tree frogs. Pine, there's the name implies, they're really common in pine flatwoods. Also sandhills, which are more open xeric or drier habitat usually than pine flatwoods are. And then isolated wetlands, many times that lack fish. They're also roadside ditches. So by and large, you don't see them where they have fish. And they have a really beautiful tadpole that's an image right there you see with red on the tail fin, and then this long, it's even usually longer than that, a flagellum that sticks out. So my email is tadpole@ufl.edu, and I chose that as a grad student years ago, and it stuck when I came back. I spent a lot of time learning to identify tadpoles when I was in graduate school. When they're really young, they do not have those spots. So those developed over time. The way I learned that was rearing them up from tadpoles and taking a close look at them. You won't see that in any of the field guides, though. So their call is, I don't know how to describe it, a chattering, sounds like Morse code. It does not sound frog-like. Not that those other ones sounded frog-like, and no frog in Florida makes the sound ribbit. That's just maybe a frog somewhere, but none of ours. So if we try to, that's the Pinewood treefrog. Have you heard that around here? Okay. So they do occur there. And in the background, you probably can't hear it. I was hearing little oak toads calling. So that is the Pinewoods tree frog, Hyla femoralis. And this is two of them out at on a pine tree, just for demonstration's sake. But usually brown or gray. All right. Next one, probably our most beautiful tree frog, a very handsome devil. This is the barking tree frog, Hyla gradiosa. This is a large, plump, very round frog, sort of shaped like a toad, but you can see these large toe pads. So it's a good climber. It's in the genus Hyla. They have granular skin, not warty, but granular. So very bumpy skin that's uniformly distributed all over their body. And they can be, as you can see here, brown. They can be green and lots of different patterns in between. But almost always you can see these darker round spots on their back. And this frog gets to be about 2 inches long. They're just gorgeous. And at one point they were proposed to be our state amphibian, but I don't think a state amphibian was ever passed by in Tallahassee. It never came about. But beautiful, beautiful frog. Probably my favorite frog in Florida. This one, only in isolated wetlands. So they might hold water for a long time, but the pond, the little wet area, has to be so isolated from permanent water with fish that there are no fish in it. If it has fish in it, they cannot breed there. They will not breed there. So when people, historically moved around bass in the Ocala National Forest and dumped them in places where they're not supposed to be, that's not good for this species of amphibian. Now, I used to, when I do this to my students, there's a second little speaker there that I click first. When I say, listen close, kids, the call is very quiet. And I click the call and it's like a dog barking, and it scares them and it makes me laugh every time. I'm not doing that to you guys. I think I have the actual call of the frog in there, but if they're in the distance and there's a group of them, it sounds like bloodhounds or some other hound dog sort of baying in the background. So some of these things, use your imagination, okay? So barking tree frog, barking dogs, sort of. Let's try it now. No. That's a bummer. Hopefully that all the other ones don't fail from now on. It kind of sounds like that green tree frog call. Let's back up and we'll move forward again and see what happens. Boo. Well, you'll have to just look up later on your phone, barking tree frog. So maybe if we have some time afterwards, we'll look up the ones that don't work. I hope that doesn't mean that all the other ones aren't going to work either, or it's going to be mighty quiet. I'm going to have to do my best to mimic the frogs. Some of them I can do pretty well. Other ones, not so much. All right, well, we'll move on. So we have Cope's gray tree frog is the next one. This frog gets to the southern distributional limit of its range. It has a huge range in the eastern U.S. And I will point out, most of the frogs I'm showing you don't occur just in Florida. They occur throughout the southeastern coastal plain. So somewhere sort of along the coast from basically Texas up into Virginia. That's the coastal plain. This one occurs well outside of the coastal plain too, in the mountainous areas, a huge range in the eastern U.S., and it's about the southern limit of its distribution, really in Ocala. But Gainesville, we can, for all intents and purposes, about where it reaches its limit. It likes forested wetlands. It likes swamps primarily. You can see it's got warty skin. So this one is, as Cuban tree frogs advance farther north and their range overlaps more with this one, this is a real concern of mine when it comes to people misidentifying gray tree frogs. And I don't want them to do that. So part of my outreach is to educate people about this. So it's a very warty frog. You can see here, they can be very cryptic. So this is a frog on a lichen covered tree. There's its eyes, and it's got these warts, but they're by and large, they're not highly variable in size. They're all somewhat the same size. And they also occur on the top of the head, where they don't in the Cuban tree frogs. And then in the gray tree frog, and there's two species in the eastern U.S., only one in Florida, they have a white blotch under the eye. Can't see it in that one, it's from the top, but a white blotch under the eye. Other than that, they do look a lot like Cuban tree frogs. Lots of different habitats where they will occur, and their call, hopefully it will go, it's sort of it sounds like that. We'll see if I can get it close. Hopefully this one will work. Doesn't look like it's going to work either. It's a trill. Try that. The links are there. I guarantee you. I put them in last night and I double checked on my computer at home. Yeah, we had an issue when we first queued it up. Every time we advanced, it was playing in the call, and we messed around with it, and then, yep, can't. Here, hit escape, and let's see what happens. Most of them are anywhere from an inch to about an inch and a half. This one could be about an inch and a half. Now try clicking there. See if it'll play. Oh, yeah, the next one, but maybe this will help. Let's try him. Yeah, some technical glitch. I redid all the links. So it's a loud trill, if you will. Not them. That's not them. Bummer. All right, we'll just move on, and maybe we'll look them up. Then we'll look them up later. All right, spring peeper. This is one I really hope works because I get my whistle done, got up and went, and there it is. They sound like a whistling call, and when there's a whole bunch of these together, like a chorus of thousands of them, like happens some places in the eastern U.S. I've not been in a chorus that big, unfortunately, but I've been told it's like deafening. It is just overwhelming, the sounds that they make. This frog will start calling in a month or so, maybe in a couple weeks. And again, if you have any areas around here where you have, pooled water, even if it's a retention pond, as long as there's some veg around it, but certainly if there's a sort of a swamp within forested area, you're going to start hearing them. They have a very, a whistling peep. They're called spring peeper. In Florida, they should be called the winter peeper because they are not a harbinger of spring. They are a harbinger of winter for us. And Orlando is about the southern limit of their distribution, or it was at one time. It might have moved farther north with climate change. So small puny frog. This one we're talking just an inch, and unless they're calling, you're never going to know they're around. There are probably hundreds, if not thousands of them in the woods right around here, but they don't hang out on windows at night. They're just really tough to detect unless they're calling. But when they're breeding and calling, you can't miss them because they're usually calling, multiple nights, night after night after night, as long as there's some standing water. And they're called they're a brown colored frog or reddish, and they're Pseudacris crucifer, and that refers to the X that is on their back. It's not always a perfect X, but it's a distinctive X that's on everyone I've ever seen. There we go. Did you look it up? Or did it just play? It just started playing on its own. Maybe now might be the timer might be kicking in. So if you heard that just this huge chorus of these peeping frogs. So, but it's like a whistle. And if you're out in the woods and you hear one and you want to get a look at it and it stops, you just go, it will start and you get closer. And sorry, on Zoom, I'm going to demonstrate something with both hands. But to hear them better, you cup your hands like that and you're like a parabolic microphone. And you can there's the frog. Closer and closer and closer and finally, oh, there it is. You got the camera, you take the picture. Yeah. There's a little advice on how you get frogs. That's how I got the picture of this one right here. It was in a roadside ditch over in Palatka, and I heard him calling, and I went closer, and I kept whistling at him, and finally I got the picture. It's a little blurry, but with his vocal sac extended. Most frogs, or a lot of frogs, have a vocal sac from the throat Some of them have two of them paired come out on the sides, and we have one in Florida that's that way. So that's the spring peeper, the southern spring peeper. Again, huge range in the eastern U.S. All right, we'll move on. Now I'm not able to advance. There we go. All right, I think this is the last of the highlights. This is the cricket frog, and I presume called a cricket because it's small. You can see my fingers holding two there. They're less than an inch long, maybe because also their call. It doesn't sound cricket-like. It sounds like two marbles, glass marbles clicking together. But this is a small frog, also highly variable in color, like the squirrel tree frog. You can see these are the same species, one with green, one with brown. They sometimes can have yellow or even reddish markings on them. They almost always have this little triangle on the top of the head. And if you were to stretch out their legs again and look at their rump, they have stripes. Looks like a piece of grilled meat, and hence the name gryllus. I tell my students, apologies, grilled ass, gryllus. All right, that's how my students they'll remember this one, Acris gryllus, because they have to learn the scientific names for their exams. So lots of toe webbing for a tree frog because they're aquatic. Also unique about this one is that they're active any time of the day, usually very active in the middle of the day. On a sunny day, if you walk around a body of water where these frogs occur, you'll see them hopping all around the shoreline. So we'll see if the call plays. You can try this one too. Maybe move that, and I was killing time to see maybe if we've been on the slide for 2 minutes if it's going to play, but I don't know what's happened. Again, he worked at home last night on my computer. So it's like gick, gick, gick. If you can imagine two marbles clicking, I mean, it really does sound. It does sound like that. Two marbles clicking together. And again, we'll if we have time, we'll just go online and just Google their calls. So, all right. So the next one we go to is a frog that I can mimic its call pretty good. That's the eastern narrowmouth toad. They're called narrowmouth toads. Really, narrowmouth frogs is a better name because they're not toads. They're not true toads, but that's just often what they're called. They're in the family Microhylidae, which is a extremely diverse group of frogs, like in South America. We only have one in Florida, and that is the one I'm going to show you next, the eastern narrowmouth. So they're not a true toad, even though that's used as their name. They don't have dry skin. They don't have those glands. But they do have a pointy snout, a folded skin between the eyes, and they have long, thin toes, and they feed on ants. They're ant specialists. And this is the one. You can see maybe slide that one to the side. So you can see the pointy little snout. Here's another one that's sort of tough to tell. That's the frog snout there, often with a folded skin right behind the eyes that you can see in that one. So plump, slimy little frogs. They're tough to work with if you're trying to handle them for research. They're always almost like they can turn inside out, it seems like. And they're squirming around, getting out of your grasp. This is another one, only in wetlands that don't have any predatory fish. So one body of water is not the same as another body of water when it comes to breeding sites for many of our frogs. So brown, grayish, black colored, with that pointy snout, those long, thin toes. Those are good features, hardly any webbing. And their call sounds like meh. I'm pretty good at that one. I mean, anyone can do that one, right? Meh, and that's really what it sounds like. I don't know if we're going to get this one to work either, but apparently not. But meh. When I give talks like this to kids, I make sure the kids know how to do that call, and I implore them to entertain your parents on the ride home, kids. Meh. I wish I could be a fly in those cars sometimes. Well, I probably was cursed by many a parent, but that's okay. The kids were having fun. All right, so the only member of that very diverse group is this one that we have in Florida. Next one, oops, I have that, are the spadefoots, which there are several species in the U.S. The one that we have in Florida, its closest relative, is in the western U.S. This is a frog that likes dry, xeric areas. You will be, if you go out at night, they will be in hammocks like you have here. If you went out with a headlamp and were shining on the ground, they're a type of toad, so they're always on the ground. They don't climb. You might see their eye shine. But when they really come conspicuous is after a really heavy rain. And if you're able to get the frog in hand, you can see dry, warty skin, stout-bodied. They have parotoid glands, but they're very flat. They're not very conspicuous. And they have vertical pupils, and they have this prominent spade on their rear foot for digging. So they dig into the soil, they sort of use their legs, and they shimmy back and forth and bury down into the sand. So there's a picture of one here. This is from Gainesville. You can see the little warts on the back, also a distinct hourglass feature on them. And there's another one, again, inch and a half is a really huge one, so they're not very big. You can see this one really beautiful with yellow on it, very plump frog. And there's that spade that they use for digging. Now, this is an explosive breeder. A lot of the other amphibians I've showed you, they'll be breeding over an extended period of time. This frog is just, there'll be, hopefully there'll be no big breeding events of spadefoots this year because they like tropical storms and hurricanes. And we're almost through that season. They are, sometimes I call them the hurricane toad. They need a lot of rain to breed. And usually when we get enough rain, it's associated with a tropical system. And then about 14 days later, I start getting emails. Now, if it comes through from South Florida, I will get emails from South Florida. What are all these this horde of little toads? They're everywhere. What are they? I'm like, yeah, they're spadefoot toads. So this image, I don't know if people on Zoom can see it, but it's sort of tough to tell. But this line right here, this is the reflection of water. I know the image is not very good. This is in the Ocala forest. This is a large pond, probably about 2 times the size of this room. This area was where a dirt road went down, and as it would rain, it was on a slope. All the sand just would get washed down. It formed like a delta. So this is a big sandy area. There's the edge of the wetland. This area is about the size of this stage. All of these are raisin-sized spadefoot toads. They're a carpet. That's more individual vertebrate animals than I've ever seen in one place in my life. It's like if you think just a massive school of little small fish. That's what this is like. They are the size of a raisin. I kid you not. And because there was a big explosive breeding event, they're all synchronous on their timing. They're from the desert, so their strategy is when it rains, we got to get in and get out because we know the water's not going to last long. Usually it also means there's no predators in there to take them. And they just within, sometimes it's as short as 10, 12 days to maybe, 3 weeks, but usually it's around 14 days. In mass, they all come out. And that's when people just see them all over the place. And if you're really interested in them, if you just Google UF hurricane toad, you will find an outreach document that I finally got tired of trying to write long emails when people would send me things and say, hey, what are these? So I finally got with a student. I'm like, we really need to write a publication on this. So now I just say, here, see this link, read this publication. So really cool little frog. And probably the call's not marked, but it sounds like a bah, bah, sort of a vomiting sound. Bah, and they will respond to that. If they're floating around in the water, they float the surface of the water and you go, bah, they'll bah back at you. Hey, is that one going to work? And again, if you see one, you go up to it and go, bah, the frog will go back at you. Bah. But Tom Petty Park is over on the north side of town. You wouldn't think Tom Petty Park would hold any water, but when it's really wet, there's an area where water pools there, and the spadefoots go nuts there. So usually each year when after big rain, I will walk over there and wade around and take pictures of spadefoots and have a little conversation with them. I do not know what they're saying. Let me be clear, all right? I don't know what they're telling me. I can guess, but I won't share that with you here. All right, so that's the eastern spadefoot. And they're calling again. All right. Now we move on to what are called the, quote, true frogs. This is the, J. Michigan frog, hello my baby, hello my darling frog of the Bugs Bunny fame. This is what you normally think of, or people do when they think of frogs, okay? They're our largest frogs. Now we're talking, some of them might be, snout vent or nose to rump, about 6, 7 inches long. If you stretch their legs out, they even might be, 10 to 12 inches long. Very extensive toe webbing because most of them are very aquatic, so they need that toe webbing to swim around. It includes bullfrogs. And then scientists are always messing around with taxonomy, and they're used to be in the genus Rana, and it was changed to other different names, Lithobates, Aquarana, Panther Rana. I think it's back to Rana now, so I'm always battling with this. But nonetheless, the true frogs in the family Ranidae. And if this will advance now. First one is the southern leopard frog. This is the one I mentioned that has it has vocal sacs on this side. There's a vocal sac here and one on the other side. So when they're calling, it's like they have these little, pouches that come out on either side of the head. This is a winter breeder. All right. This frog will start calling soon. And if you really want to hear one, you go on a nice chilly night and you 4 or 5 a.m., a couple hours before dawn is when they really are doing most of their calling. Matter of fact, when I was doing this and playing one of the calls last night, it just brings me back to the Ordway Swisher Preserve when I used to go camping with my buddy out there all the time. And it just, it just takes me back to that spot. If you ever get invited to a frog jumping contest, go to the bank, fill your pockets with cash, and then go catch a southern leopard frog, and it will probably win you some money. I would just bet all you have on one of these, right? They're really, really strong jumpers. They have pointy snouts. They're beautiful. They're usually green or brown or some combination thereof. Usually these odd-shaped round or rectangular spots on the back, not all the time. And then they have this bead, this so-called dorsolateral fold or dorsolateral ridge that runs down the back. And that one you can really see the pointy snout. And then frequently on the tympanum is basically the external eardrum of frogs. It's a round piece of skin that communicates with the ear bones underneath the skin. Often have a little white dot right in the middle of that tympanum, but you don't need that. You got all these other features. They're beautiful, beautiful frogs. Rana sphenocephala, I think Rana ubiquitous would be a good name for this frog. They're all over the place. Isolated wetlands that lack fish, lakes, roadside ponds, all over the place. When I was studying a frog called a gopher frog, I was going around dip netting all over the place, and I would catch southern leopard frog tadpoles most everywhere I was. But they need more permanent bodies of water because their tadpole takes months to reach, metamorphosis. It's not so short like that spadefoot. So a 2-part call, we'll see if it works. There's one that sounds like a chuckle, kind of like, and then another one that sounds like if you were rubbing your finger across a wet balloon. It's like sort of a squeaky sound. We'll see if it works. I don't know if it will. That one's not looking like it cooperates, but we'll try to look that up. So I'm pretty good. And that's not unlike the frog's call. I swear to you. You can check me by going on your phone if you want. But all right, so that's southern leopard frog. And then we have, when Ellen was asking, hey, can you talk about some of the frogs that are around the property? I think immediately, any ranid that's around here, you're going to have this one. You're going to have the bronze frog. Another frog that has a huge range in the eastern U.S. and occurs much farther north in Florida. Up there, it's called the green frog. Here, it's called the bronze frog for good reason. It's bronzy in color. This is I forget what that image from. That's along the Swanee River. Not as big as the other rands. Southern leopard frog might be about 3 inches. This one will get to about 2 inches, and you can see the bronzy color body. And then also, like the leopard frog, it has this little line or ridge, this dorsolateral fold down the back. Their tadpole is fairly easy to identify among the ranids. I won't try to bore you with what it looks like, but fairly easy to identify. Roadside ditches and creek edges, but they like forested areas like you have around here. I'm sure you have them around. And their call that sounds like the pluck of an out-of-tune banjo string, which is probably not going to work, but sort of like down, 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 down. If it will, we can try it again. Maybe this one will work. I don't know. That's what it sounds like. That one might work. Like an out-of-tune banjo string. And not especially loud. It might be if you're walking, on one of your trails, and this is a summer breeder. You might just, what is that weird noise? It's not ribbit, right? So you can see the diversity of calls these frogs make. They're all different because it's a reproductively isolation mechanism. So one frog sounds different from another one, so the females know which species to be attracted to. So that's the bronze frog. Next one is the pig frog. If you've ever eaten, admit it, have you ever eaten frog legs? I have before. If you're in Florida or maybe in the Southeast and you have frog legs that are not imported, but it's a native frog, that's what they were. So if you know anyone that goes out frog gigging, which people like to do, it's the pig frog they're after. It's not the bullfrog, it's the pig frog. Pig frog occurs throughout the state and well down into the southern part of the state in Lake Okeechobee, Bullfrogs do not occur down there. This is a big frog, and you can see they do have kind of, if you're going to eat a frog leg, they're kind of meaty. But having eaten frog legs once, the old saying, tastes just like chicken. So I'm just gonna stick with chicken from now on. Big frog, total, length stretched out on a big one with the legs extended maybe 12 inches. And usually they're green colored. They look a lot like the bullfrog. And if you look at a bullfrog's rump, it's stippled. It doesn't have what almost looks like a bit of a stripe here. It's more finely stippled than this. And this is one to be 100%, like when people email me a picture, I'm like, I need to have the frog in hand. And the reason is I need to stretch out the rear webbing of the back foot, and I need to see how far that webbing extends. If it goes out and it's attached to that last little digit on that, well, it's the longest finger. I won't give you the bird. It's basically if the frog was going to flick you off, it'd be using that long finger. The webbing sticks on that last little digit. Where in the bullfrog, it stops right before that joint. So that's to be 100% sure. That's one the way we can identify them. This is a frog of big bodies of water. Lakes is where they'll be, although I do see them in some smaller, fishless bodies of water too. Their call is like a kind of pig-like, sort of a and this is a summer breeder, and there it should be done by now. Let's see if we got their call. And it doesn't look like it. It's like a again, pig-like. You have to use your imagination, okay? None of these sound exactly like their name describes them, but that's where they get their name, because this call sounds like a pig. And speaking of pigs, this pig's got to take a drink real quick. All right, so the next one is the American bullfrog, which is a massive frog. They have a huge tadpole. You see in the bottom, the ones down in Florida, people have suggested that it might be its own species, and it may be the case and just hasn't been adequately described yet. But this is a really large frog. They're native to the eastern U.S. They don't get into South Florida. So if you're from South Florida and you see a big ranid and you think, oh, is it a pig frog or a bullfrog? It's going to be a pig frog. In the western U.S., where they've been imported for this one, also for frog legs. This frog has been moved throughout the world, and it's a bad invasive species in places. And in the western U.S., it's a bad invasive species. It's big, and it will eat some of the native frogs out there. Here in Florida, it's native, and it's big. It usually has all this vermiculations, these worm-like markings often you'll see on the back. This was one down around Lake Placid, which is very southern for them. And then that one is I took in the duck pond over in the duck pond area of Gainesville. But another really, really big frog, about on par with the pig frog. And that's the one I said the toe webbing does not go out to the tip of the toe. And again, huge tadpoles. I've seen a tadpole one time. It was as long as my hand. It was like 5 inches long. And again, these bigger ones, these ranids, need longer. If you're a tree frog or like that spadefoot, you don't need near as long for your tadpole to go from an egg to a small frog. These guys need months, 6 months or more. And in the northern part of its range, the tadpoles might overwinter. It might take them longer than a year to go from a tadpole to a frog. Their call, if you get a Peterson guide, which is a really popular guide for amphibians, it will say their call sounds like jug-o-rum. It just sounds like, know what the rum, maybe the person was drinking rum when they decided that's what it sounded like. And it also does not look like we're going to get the call to work, but just a long out droning. And if you don't know alligator and frog calls, you might say, oh, I think that's an alligator. It's not an alligator belling. It's a bullfrog. All right. We're winding down here. So these are the last ones. Hope you can bear with me for another 10 or so minutes. So there's 4 non-native frogs in Florida. I don't have the 4th one up here. That's called the tropical clawed frog. It's one little population down around Tampa. These other ones I put up here because the relatively broad range. Cuban tree frogs and green tree frogs occur here. Cane toads and marine toads, not yet probably. And I'll talk about that more when I get to the slide. So we'll go through each of these 3 and talk a little bit about them. Now, each of these I've worked with my undergrad students on. Let's see, That's a grad student. That's just me. And this one's a bunch of undergrads together. We wrote an outreach publication. So if you're interested in learning more about any of them, the URL is down there. But really, if you just, Google greenhouse frog in Florida, UF, you're going to find the link to it. So this was another one. I kept getting emails about the frog. I'm like, well, let's write an outreach publication. So even though they're not native to Florida, they're native to the Caribbean. This is their range now in Florida and throughout the eastern U.S. You can see they've really expanded their range a lot. This is a small little, about an inch long or less, brown frog that is sometimes stippled, sometimes it's striped. They don't have toe pads, but they can climb a rough surface, so you might see them off the ground, but they're not going to be hanging around on your window usually. Really unique about the biology of this one, all of our native frogs have a tadpole stage. This frog lays its eggs terrestrially in a moist environment, and a little bitty version of the adult hatches out. There is no tadpole. So these are eggs attached to some landscaping fabric, and you can see that's the eyes. Those are the eyes, the little developing embryos in there. So, and that's sort of the yolk on the belly. So 2 eyes right there, and they lay relatively large eggs and relatively small clutch sizes, or the group of eggs is called a clutch. So they're really good at getting around because they like to be associated with people. And if they lay that group of eggs in a flower pot or some, ornamental plant, and that plant gets shipped somewhere, the eggs go with it, you might have enough individuals to start a population. This one's introduced. There are no obvious or no overt impacts that I'm aware of. Now, they can carry chytrid fungus, but they don't eat native frogs. They're not much of an annoyance to people. It's probably the call is not going to work, and that's unfortunate because it's a small little, well, it will work. Sounds like that little chirping sound. Somebody told me one time, tiny sneakers on a hardwood floor. I laughed. I'm like, that's bull. And I listened to it. I'm like, that kind of sound like that. Okay. So if you imagine little mini basketball players skiing around on the floor. Very in-like. The frog's about that big. Sounds like very insect-like. No doubt you will hear them. I'm sure these things are all around the campus here at Oak Hammock. But no obvious impacts. But the research hasn't really been done yet. Are they competing with some native frogs? Who knows? But there's nothing obvious. So I'm gonna call them introduced. All right, not invasive. An invasive species is one that is introduced outside of its range by the actions directly or indirectly of people, and then it causes problems. It might have negative impacts on the local economy for one reason, or on negative impacts of human quality of life, or negative impacts on the environment, or a combination of all of those. And the last frog, Cuban tree frog, is all three. The next one is the cane toad, and now it started playing on the advance, but so looks like that one worked. So this is the cane toad, marine toad, giant toad, bufo toad. It goes by a bunch of different names, but it's a true toad. They get really big. So if you are in the range of the toad, which you can see, even though the rest of the state's covered, as far north as they are established, as far as I'm aware, is into land right there. However, I will point out that over the past year or two, I've got a number of people from St. Augustine there emailing me, sometimes with an image, and I'm like, oh, southern toad, or they no image. I'm like, yeah, cane toads aren't there. Well, I had a couple exchanges with a guy over the weekend, and a picture, just not a very good picture in a bucket. I thought I saw the cranial crest on the toad, and I'm like, that's a southern toad. Well, if that's the same toad that his daughter took a picture and shared with me on Sunday, I was mistaken, and that is a cane toad. So there's a recent record of at least one cane toad in St. Augustine. There's also some one-offs. There's a record or two from Gainesville. Not established as far as I know. The issue is they become established in an area, people need to become aware of it because this toad is very toxic, and these large parotid glands, there you see them again, that are on the back, contain a lot of toxin, and under pressure, they squirt out this very viscous substance, white substance, that will get on a dog's gums or an animal's gums, and they can, if there's enough of it and you don't take action, it can kill your pet. So the impacts here are not so much ecological, although they do eat some native species. At least right now, by and large, cane toads do not get into natural areas. Within that part of the range, you see, They're around neighborhoods, ball fields, agricultural fields, places that have been modified by people. And why they are just, that's good for them, I'm not sure. In Australia, this is a very, very bad invasive species. It's caused declines of native crocodilians and frog-eating snakes. There is no evolutionary history of the native animals in Australia with a toad like this. In Florida, we do have it. Our animals have an evolutionary history with toads. There's several species like that native southern toad I mentioned. So maybe there's enough natural predators that are keeping them out of the natural areas. I don't know. That's a really interesting question that I'm probably never I'll never figure it out. But you need to be aware of this, or if you have friends in South Florida, they should really get this outreach publication on cane toads, because again, they can be a real problem for people's pets. And then the human side is the cost, or if your beloved pet dies from a cane toad, that is some major negative impact on your quality of life. Their call sounds like a melodious drumming, and I will tell you, I know this call. I didn't record it, but I know it was recorded in Florida because there's a lot of Florida frogs calling in the background as well. That is the cane toad. And there's a southern toad. This is a mixed forest, probably somewhere in South Florida. And no all right. And this has become such a problem in some places. There are a couple little businesses, these cottage industries have opened up where people, it's like lawn maintenance service. You pay them to come to your yard and remove toads and do things to try to make your yard toad proof, because they become that much of a problem. And they've really, in the past 10 years, have really expanded their range a lot around Naples. There's this gap in the distribution. They're probably there. They just haven't been reported enough, quote, to science where we know about them, but they're probably there. And then the last one on the list is the Cuban tree frog. This is one I've been working with for pretty much my whole career at UF. And if you can move the text for me, I want to show you. When I started here, I was at USGS when after I graduated, which is there in Gainesville. They had just gotten to the Gainesville area. They didn't have this widespread. None of these populations that are out in the Panhandle were there. And now, just because the area is white doesn't mean there are no records. It just means I don't think they're established in breeding yet. Now all these are established in breeding populations. Tallahasseans along there, Port St. Joe, Panama City, all up. That probably the whole area of the Panhandle, particularly near the coast, is going to get populated with breeding populations if they're not already there. So even though I've done a lot of outreach and people remove them, clearly we have not stopped the invasion of them. They get transported on vehicles, palm trees. I got an email from a guy last week from an island I've never heard of called, I think, St. Eustatia is what it's called. It's in the Caribbean. And they did a new development came in, and he says Cuban tree frogs showed up in the palm trees that were imported here, probably from Florida. And so I'm going to give him some advice on what to do, and I'm going to kind of wrangle to say, you know what, I really need to come to your Caribbean island and do a site visit and consult with you. Well, one, it would be cool if I could help him eradicate those frogs. And another thing, it's a Caribbean island, So I'm going to see if I can work that angle there. But they've been in Florida since like probably the early 1900s. We don't know exactly. Started out in Key West, came over in cargo, probably from Cuba. They're native to Cuba and some of the Bahamian islands. And then over time have just continued to expand their range all throughout the Panhandle, all throughout the peninsula and into the Panhandle. They will be in natural habitats, but they're very common in suburban areas where there are people. Unfortunately, I would be very surprised if you didn't have Cuban tree frogs around on the property. A female Cuban tree frog can get 4 or 5, maybe 6 inches long, as big as your hand. And that makes them twice, 3 times as big as all of our native tree frogs. So if the two of them are cohabitating on a wall, the Cuban tree frog is going to eat that native tree frog. So throughout Central and South Florida, from basically Orlando south, in suburban areas, I no longer get emails from anybody. It just never happens. I never get an email from someone down there saying, hey, I think this is a Cuban tree frog. And I'm like, hip, hip, hooray. No, it's a squirrel tree frog. The squirrel tree frogs are gone. They probably persist in natural areas, but so through predation, that's been a problem. So that's one of their impacts. They also will invade people's homes. They come in through standpipes that are on the roof that allows your plumbing system to work. And they get in there because it's a nice, place to hide, out of the wind. And they want to go to moisture, so they'll go down the pipe, and occasionally they will show up in people's toilets. I don't have the toilet picture here, but I got a picture of a toilet when I used to work down in Plant City. They're like, go get Steve, there's a frog in the toilet. Steve's like, oh yeah, get the camera. And I use that image lots of times. And most people freak out if there's a frog. You would probably freak out if you open the lid, there's a frog. I'd be like, Cuban tree frog. Get the camera and then get the benzocaine, or just catch them, throw them in the fridge for a couple hours and in the freezer. That's humane. And that's what I suggest people do. But you can see they get really big. There's an image of one, this little kid had this one. He better wash his hands really well because they have a very noxious skin secretion. And if you handle a Cuban tree frog and don't wash your hands, and then you either rub your nose or your eyes, within a few minutes, you're going to wonder what had happened. It's going to be really burning very intensely. So they eat the native frogs. They have that impacts people. They occasionally will get electrical equipment and cause short circuits. I've a story, one little kid, not that one, but his parents took him to the ER because they didn't know what was going on. They realized after the fact he'd been handling a Cuban tree frog, and as little kids do, didn't wash his hands. They will breed in unkept swimming pools, and they can be annoying, their calls, even though they're not especially loud. If there's a lot of them and it's right next to you, that can be annoying. And I get complaints sometimes about people saying, hey, I can't get any sleep because of these frogs. I'm like, well, your neighbor needs to maintain their pool better. And as a matter of fact, the neighbor across from me has a above ground pool, and the calls, if it works, is just a month ago. I got up at like 5 a.m. and I heard them, and I went over to my phone and got an audio. I don't know if it'll work or not, but it doesn't look like it's going to. But it's a sort of a kind of like the southern leopard frog with this squeak, sort of a squeaking door or a squeaking sound that they make, and just repeated over and over again. And then they're really variable. They can be brown, gray, beige. These are juveniles that have a little line on their side. The eye is red. You can see they're covered in warts of varying sizes. Some of them are very warty, some of them not as much, but you can still see the warts. The little guys have red eyes, and that line disappears as they get bigger. And then if you were to hold that little frog up to light, you can see the bones look sort of light blue through the skin. And they're fairly easy to identify. And I'm getting emails about Cuban tree frog metamorphs, these little guys now, because the breeding is happening. It's sad, but I get lots of emails about, oh, my kid and I, we saved all these tadpoles, and now we raised them up, and I'm really worried they're Cuban tree frogs. And I write back, I'm like, yep. Time for the kid to learn some hard facts about life. I'm going to ask you to humanely euthanize these frogs, And they think they're doing the right thing, and then they realized, oh no. So, so a very invasive species. So that's all I have. I think the next one just says, thanks for listening, and there's a picture of a spadefoot looking at you. So I know I took more than my allotted time, and I thank you for listening, and I'll take any questions, and I'll hang out for a while. Thank you. Yeah, Cuban tree frog has tadpoles, and I'm glad you asked that. They will breed and they'll lay their eggs in an ornamental pond, like people put up for koi. They will lay their eggs in a bird bath, a large object that if you have like a little child's wading pool that is, discarded and holding water. This is a little bit of a stretch, but if it will breed mosquitoes, they'll probably be breeding in there. They're native to the Caribbean, and the places that they would naturally breed there are small solution holes in limestone. And so also if you have like a rain barrel and there's a way for them to get in there, they'll breed in there. But they have a tadpole that's about that big, sort of a nondescript. But when I see images, I can tell it's a tree frog tadpole by the location of the eyes. And then depending on where the people live and the situation, usually it's fairly easy to diagnose if they have one. There, I think, are like a month to 2 months. A couple months, I'd say. And also, it's going to depend on the temperature and the amount of food that the tadpoles have available.
Would the type or number of frogs be an indicator of water pollution?
You know what? There's a lot of issues with amphibian, conservation, and that is always a concern. Water quality, but the bigger ones are habitat loss. Always, that's right at the top. Sometimes invasive species, and then the big ones are this disease, this Batrachochytrium dendrobatus. That's the one affecting frogs. But sometimes they like to maybe think if they're an indicator of water quality, but I don't know there's a lot of literature out there on that. But clearly, if you have, a imperiled system with pollutants, you're probably not going to have a lot of the, some of the native frogs.
Yeah. You had a lot of frogs eating other frogs. So how does that work? I mean, did they have toxins? They don't have teeth, right? So they just swallow it?
Just big, yeah. Now they have except the toes. Remember, they have, tooth on the lower jaw that they would hang on to them. But, I have a lot of pictures that people have sent me of Cuban tree frogs, and you'll just see the rear legs sticking out from the frog's mouth of the native frogs. And they'll do that. I mean, the frog doesn't, it's like, hey, it's just something small. It's moving on the, side of a building. Do the same thing with insects, but they've just, and they also are cannibalistic. I realized that when I caught a whole bunch of them and I put them in an aquarium while I was collecting them. And I came back the next morning to the office and I'm like, there's only 3 frogs in here. I swear I had 10 in there last night. They will eat each other too.
So they don't chew them. They just kind of swallow it.
Swallow them whole. Yeah, there's no ability to chew. Frogs do not have a very strong jaw. Their jaw is very thin. There are lots of modifications. Their backbone is, I think it's only like 8 sacral vertebrae. They have a thing called they have a very expanded pelvic girdle with an extra bone in there called the urostyle. That's for jumping locomotion. And their heads are very wide and they have a really big mouth. So it's just, they just take things in. Their front legs will help, but also they could use that sticky tongue, But yeah, just swallow their food whole, like a snake would. Let's see. There's one. NIH, 500 toxins, South American frogs. Okay, so there's a whole group of frogs often referred to as poison dart frogs, and the reason they're South American is that they have an extremely toxic skin secretion. A lot of those frogs are very aposematically colored or boldly colored to advertise to would-be predators, hey, I'm bright red or I'm really boldly colored. You don't want to mess with me, like a bee or a wasp, it's warning coloration. And natives down there are known for rubbing the arrow tips on the frog to get those toxins. Now, I wish I knew what was in the skin of Cuban tree frogs. So they're asking, is it possible here? Yeah, I don't know a whole lot of research that's been done on the secretions of North American frogs. And I'd like to know with Cuban tree frogs, and somebody at one time wanted to do that, and I was going to collaborate with them, but it never went anywhere. So there's certainly something in there that causes that really, nasty irritation to mucous membranes, and presumably these are all going to evolve as anti-predatory defenses, So, and it should taste bitter, because if you're a predator and you grab a frog, it doesn't help the frog much if you consume the frog and then you die. The frog's better off if you taste it, spit it out, and then have a really bad experience, maybe a big frog hangover, and you're like, I'm never getting anywhere near that frog again. That's a more, evolutionary stable strategy. Yes.
I'm looking for a really good, effective Merlin type app for locating Florida frog calls.
I don't know of a frog call like what she refers to this great app called Merlin that's available for free. And it's for bird calls. And it's not 100%. I've used Merlin a lot, and sometimes it doesn't recognize one, but it's usually pretty darn good. And it really helps if you're like, I think I'm hearing this, and then you can get that bird in your binoculars. Aha, that's the black and white warbler I'm hearing, and there it is. There's not one available for frogs that I'm aware of. And I don't have the know-how, and I also got the no time thing going on that it's probably not something I'm going to do. I have an online guide to Florida frogs. If you Google UF Wildlife Home, you'll find my website, and there's snake identification. There's a page for frogs that are on there that you can go check out. But something will happen eventually, and maybe something's out and I'm just not aware of it. And when it does, I'll be the first to get it, because that's, I know all the frogs by sound, but I travel around the US. There's frogs I don't know. And then it'd be great if you go to other places in the world too. That's a really useful tool, because as you saw, like birds, frogs have species-specific sounds that they make. And when people are monitoring birds, many times They don't need to see the bird. They just go to a spot, a point count it's called, and stand there and listen. And they're like, okay, here's my checklist. If you're good and you can differentiate all those, and birds are a lot tougher than frogs, at least here in Florida, but it's a really useful tool for monitoring populations.
Okay, I'm gonna say thank you very much. Can we close out with a round of applause?
You're welcome. It was fun. Sorry all the calls didn't work, but I think enough of them did. So your homework is to go look up those ones